I think there was a need to have a building of this type, an apartment building, because there were a lot of people who were aging in the neighborhood, in the vicinity, not only the immediate vicinity, but many of the other areas that are outlying. And they became empty nesters. As empty nesters, this was a perfect place for them to finally sell their homes, move in, live a happy life.
We discovered this and found this just to be absolutely perfect. We were amazed at the size.
This was brand new in Montgomery County, converting apartment complexes into condominiums. Montgomery County, at the time that we came here, was predominantly white, with very low minority, maybe 3% black and maybe 6% Hispanic. It was all middle-class, working-class people. So it was not an elite community at the time. Montgomery County only had 14 high schools, and they were, the local high school was considered a good high school.
The footprint of the building is about 4.5 acres. The rest of the building is a combination of parking areas and wooded areas, some very nice wooded areas.
The building was constructed in the late 1950s. And it opened as an apartment complex that was managed by Laszlo Tauber's company. And the story goes is that he would order materials, particularly like the windows, the casement windows that we have. On my side of the building facing the neighborhood, all of my windows are double-hung, double-sash windows that open and shut. Well, on my parents' side of the building, they face the Giant. There are no double-hung windows. There are casement windows that open and crank out. And it was because Dr. Tauber would buy these lots of equipment, and he would buy things from construction companies and get a really good deal, because he was also involved in lots of buildings for government contracts. It's a very strong structure with steel beams under everybody's apartment and wooden floors and things like that. But it was built to the 1950s standards. So it's a low-rise building that's only 4 stories. But as the units were built, it was almost as if they built them from one end to the other, and they would lay the foundations and build up. And so you see it's a very zigzaggy building that adapted to the property lines. And so we're eccentric in the way we look.
The construction of the building was interesting because Laszlo wanted more floors. He also started it in the holidays, all right, when people weren't paying attention. This place was commercial, residential, and he was smart enough to know, to research that, and he started to build, and he wanted 5 or 6 stories, and they stopped them at the 4th floor. They got that much. And then if you notice the front entrance, the front entrance is now sort of the back of the building. And that was because the neighbors fought him on that. And he went around throughout the neighborhood and talked to the neighbors and offered them money, not to fight, okay? And one of my patients was paid $25,000 to not fight Laszlo coming in here. The funny part about that was that he took the $25,000 and he knew he was selling the place.
There are 174 units in the building, but I think almost 9 or 10 of them are commercial units, beauty parlors and doctor's offices. But the majority of units are one bedroom, 2 bedroom, and there are a few 3 bedrooms. And then the builder's unit, which could have been designed for Dr. Tauber, is a beautiful 3-bedroom den, bathrooms, all galore. And we do have one efficiency.
I first met Laszlo because I was looking for a place to put an office and talked to him about it. He said, okay. I left that day and I went that weekend to a cocktail party. And at the cocktail party, I came across a mother who was telling me that her son, who's an orthodontist, was going to open up an office right where I was going to do it. I got a little mad. Okay, so on Monday, I went back over to see Dr. Laszlo, and you got to remember, I was young, and I told Dr. Laszlo that I thought he was a liar, and I told him in many words what I thought of him, and he looked at me and he said, "I've never had anybody talk to me. People don't talk to me like that." I said, "Well, that's because you scare them. You didn't scare me, you cheated me, and you lied to me." So he says, "Well, what can we do about it?" I says, "Well, I don't know. You tell me." He says, "The place is yours." He said, "And I'll make you a good deal for the rent." And after that, we became friends. When they went to condo, they tried to get the condo converted. And they had it the first time, you had to have a certain number of people do it. All right, or no particular number. They only got 6 people who went condo, and those 6 people were those of us down in the commercial. So that failed. And then years later, it came up again, and he had it sold again. This time they changed it so they could, the company, Laszlo, could keep some of the units, and that would count towards the ownership. The problem was that we had ground rent. Laszlo Tauber was a very smart man. Think about it. He rents you the land, no maintenance, nothing to do. He just picked up the money every month, okay, for the rental of the land, which this building sat on. It was a 100-year lease, as I recall. And as time moved on, and you get closer to that 100 mark, people began to get a little bit of concern because how are you going to sell your condo if it's going to go back to him?
This building was the only condo in Montgomery County which didn't own the land on which it stood. And there was a rumor, I don't know if it was true, that Dr. Tauber's plan at the end of the 99-year lease was to give the land to the state of Israel.
Tauber held on to the ground underneath us, so we had a 100 or 99-year land lease situation, which means when people bought here, their contract said they bought their unit, and they bought a percentage of the property, but they had to pay annual ground rent on it. And so that was a very unusual. A lot of people didn't want to move in here because it was odd.
It was like the Tudor system in Europe where you own the building, that's better. You own the building on the land, but you are responsible for fixing it and doing it, and you had to pay a certain amount of money to the owner. In the building, you had to write 2 checks. You had a condo fee, and you had for the land. People wanted the land to be bought, but he wouldn't sell it.
Tauber almost never sold the land to anybody, and he's got properties all over America, and he was quite adamant that he would sell the people buildings, but he would not sell them the land.
Dr. Tauber, the owner of the building, was married to a very beautiful Swiss woman. I used to see her in the elevator, very charming. But she left him, or he divorced her. I was never interested in the details. His children were the same age as my children. And so I often drove, his son was the same age as my oldest daughter. I not only drove them to Whitman, but his son and my daughter both went to Tufts University afterward, and I drove them to the airport.
Dr. Tauber was an interesting person, very much business savvy, in addition to being a doctor. He was considered more of a businessman than a doctor.
The elevator down at my end of the building, was next to Dr. Tauber's apartment, so of course he was often in the elevator. And in the beginning, we always had trouble with that elevator. It was always breaking down. And if Dr. Tauber was in the elevator, he'd say, "We're not going to have enough air. We won't be able to breathe." And I said to him, "Well, Dr. Tauber, why don't you fix the elevator?"
Dr. Tauber passed away, and his heirs were not interested in running this property. They were doctors, just like Dr. Talbert was, but were not business-oriented as he was.
A lot of people loved Dr. Laszlo Tauber, but he was a selfish man. He was a selfish man, and he was only looking out for himself. I don't mean to be mean. May he rest in peace.
We had a parade of managers. One manager intimidated me so that for years I never came in the front door.
There was this woman who staffed the desk who dressed all in black. And if you've never read the novel Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, it became a famous film too. And Mrs. Danders, all in black, who's this ominous presence who turns up when you least expect her. And she's large and pigeon-breasted and all in black. And this woman who staffed this place for those years, those early years when I was in junior high and then in high school. We called her Mrs. Danders. I don't remember what her real name was. And, you know, in Washington's incredible humidity and heat, she would always be all in black at the desk, and she would be watching whenever you looked.
It turned out that she was stealing and people were missing things. Finally, someone was smart enough to set up a camera in one of his closets, and he actually got a picture of her coming in to his apartment and going to the closet.
I did not pick the place. My husband picked the place because I couldn't come at the time. But the first time I ever walked in here, oh boy, the first time I ever walked in here, I thought it was a prison. You walk down the long corridors, I thought it was a prison.
When I first came here, there were security cameras at the doors, at the exits. I'm not sure they all worked, but there were cameras at the front desk, security cameras. Well, and there was a switchboard, which we could call down to the desk. Just pick up the switchboard and call down, and somebody would be there.
Oh, the switchboard was wonderful. You had a switchboard. You had a secretary. I have to do this. You have to have a secretary. You had a secretarial. They would buzz you, buzz, buzz, buzz.
I remember that there was a bus that took people from here to Friendship Heights.
It was like the bus that was in, in Chevy Chase. You know how the buses go around from place to place to place to place? Similar bus like that. People would do their shopping.
The property was decorated in a particular way, and we've redecorated a couple times since then, and each time we bring it into the next decade.
It used to be a lobby where there were couches and where you could sit and feel comfortable and you could visit with people.
Previously, the lobby had 2 sofas, and they were beige background with red crewel work. And so it was kind of supposed to look, and did, like a living room.
It looked like a little piece of colonial Williamsburg. And then the hallways had, it wasn't paper, it was actually a cloth hanging on them. It was white with a gold pattern, a kind of fleur-de-lis pattern on it. The lobby walls had grass cloth. It's gorgeous.
We established taking trips and had the residents sign up if they wanted to go sightseeing in Washington. They wanted to go see some places like the Homestead in Hot Springs for a weekend, that kind of thing. Also, we had parties here in the condominium, and you would bring an hors d'oeuvre or pastry that you particularly liked, and we would have that, serve it to the people, and it was, everybody enjoyed it, and we mingled, and it was fun. We played bridge, We had a wonderful time.
We did have, while I was president of the board, a ceiling collapse in the building, which was, quite traumatic. And luckily, the person whose ceiling collapsed wasn't in bed when it fell.
The openings between us and Giant, cars could drive through. And Dr. Passes had those barriers drop in place because of the liability that might be incurred with children walking and playing and people could be hit. So that was nice. That made us a little more private. The people from Albia Road and Springfield come through our property, but they used to come right through the lobby, which was very funny. Stand in the lobby and see the people come down through and out the back door to go to Giant and then come back through.
We used to live in apartment 309. Now we live in apartment 402. It's the exact same apartment. And one of the reasons that it became 402 rather than 309 was because there was no longer a basement. This floor that we're in, which is the basement, became the first floor because they knew that people would not want to buy the condominiums in the basement.
When I came, I joined what was called the building committee. And the chairman of that committee at the time was John Awkward. And he made many really important improvements. The biggest thing that I think he did was he put what's called a view in all the doors, and which is a piece of glass so that you could see who was inside or outside.
In the beginning, I used to have to go get my mail up at the front desk. And in that area, there used to be 5 ladies, okay, who were the 5 o'clock bunch. Now, when I would come up to get my mail, I had to go to the tribunal. They had asked me, how are you doing? What are you doing? How are your children? This and that other thing. And it was kind of nice, all right, because it was kind of a friendly thing. But at the same time, it was like having 5 mothers.
In the little strip mall across from the building, there were various places that have changed over the years, but there was always the Giant supermarket there.
The shopping center is so convenient. That's one of the nice things about our location. We used to have a Farrell's ice cream store that was a nighttime restaurant where people would come with their families. We used to have a dance studio. The beauty parlor has always been here. The dry cleaners has always been here. The Rite Aid has changed names. It used to be called Drug Fair. The bowling alley has changed names a couple of times, but it's really been a community center. But we have a Starbucks. We used to have a hardware store, which is now a liquor store. We've always had a drugstore. We've always had the Giant.
I always consider the open areas an amenity of our property. We have a swimming pool. We have a sun deck.
Being a young person here, the use of the pool, the tennis courts and the field for people who like to run. This is one of those neighborhoods where a woman can feel safe walking at night.
I no longer remember when I started playing for the annual meetings. First few years at least.